Thank you very much. Probably a slightly large introduction. Probably the most important thing about Mr. Stuart is that he's a father, and probably the most important part of his life, besides his wife, is his children. But before I talk about this, I'd just like to thank you very much for the opportunity to come here today. It's a fantastic facility. Certainly like to welcome everybody, and particularly the Youth Advisory Council and the chairs, Declan and Brunella, thank you very much. Let me also acknowledge the Gadigal people, and Uncle Ray, if you're here, that was a tremendous welcome to country. You say it in such a beautiful way, and it sort of makes me realise when you talk about ancestors past and present being with us, sometimes we forget that. It was only recently at my house that my wife was somewhat upset because her father had passed away, and she was rather teary one day. And my young son at a young age said, "Mum, it's okay. Pa's still here. I can see him upstairs." You think, oh, young children, they see, sometimes we see the world sometimes in a way that we don't understand past and present, where, as you say, your elders travel with you all the time, and so do ours, and sometimes we forget that. So thank you very much, Uncle Ray. That was a very nice introduction, and I enjoy always your welcome to country. I feel very respected. For those who don't know, I'm relatively new to UNICEF, and I'm still coming up to speed on what is a magnificent organisation, and an organisation which spends so much energy and effort really helping those in need and really helping children. It's a great privilege to be at UNICEF. It's a wonderful team, but it's a wonderful purpose, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that this morning, so bear with me. I have to say, as I get a little bit aged in life, those glasses have to come on, as much as I hate them, but they do help me stick on tap. I've also been, I guess, struck by the realization that as adults, we can get a bit removed through the eyes of children. We sometimes get bogged down in the realities of adulthood, and we forget how we felt as a child, how we saw the world as a child, and how we viewed the world as a child. And so I really take my hat off to all of you who are involved with protecting, supporting children. Andrew, your work, and thank you very much for hosting today. When one thinks about it, we all have rights as human rights. And I guess as adults, the assumption is we sort of know our rights, or we know where to find our rights. But as children, that is not always the case. And so there are many organisations here today who do a wonderful job ensuring the rights of children are upheld. We're fortunate to be one of those organisations, and today I want to concentrate a little bit about what we do, but by no means do I not respect the incredible work that everyone in this room does, because we're really all part of a family when it comes to supporting the rights of our children and all children in this planet. Look, we often hear that children are our future, and that is undoubtedly true. And how we treat children today will bear the consequences for the future, whether that is good or bad. However, this statement often denies the fact that children are whole, complete people in their own right today, here and now, just at a different stage of human development. Indeed, aren't we all at a different stage of our own human journey? So today is an opportunity to hear about a framework of fundamental importance to children and society as a whole, which is the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Of course, the Convention is a legal document that Australia has voluntarily agreed to, but it is much more than that. Many, including UNICEF, believe that it should be used as an ethical and political framework to advance the rights of children by adults and children alike. For children, the CRC is a tool for empowerment and understanding. Human rights education is therefore critically important for children themselves to know and to be able to claim their rights, and to respect the rights for others in the community. As adults, as I mentioned, we start to make assumptions about children. The CRC reminds us that children are experts in their own experiences, and we need to listen to them and to take into account their own concerns and aspirations. Doing so is not just necessary, because programs that do so are usually much more effective. It's also because a child's right is an inherent right. We're privileged to hear today from Sarah and from Andrew about how we can put this into practice. But first, some scene setting. What is the Convention of the Rights of the Child, or as we say, the CRC? For those who don't know, and I know many do in this room, the Convention was finalised by the United Nations in 1989, and it aspires that all children are to grow up in an environment, in an atmosphere of happiness, love, and understanding. It sets out the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights to enable this. And it explains that adults and governments have an obligation to make sure that children can ensure and enjoy their rights in practice. It outlines rights to health, rights to education, to family, to identity, to culture and protection from violence, for example. The Convention has 4 important guiding principles. These are the principles of non-discrimination. All children, regardless of race, religion, age, disability, gender and sexual orientation, are entitled to equality and non-discrimination in law and in fact. The second is best interests. The best interests of the child shall be the primary consideration in all decisions affecting them always. Third is survival. Survival and development. Every child has an inherent right to life, and decision makers must ensure they are provided every opportunity to develop and reach their full potential. And the fourth is participation. Children are experts in their own lives and experiences, and should be consulted on decisions that affect them. Of course, the Convention should not be understood in isolation. All internationally recognised human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. The Convention is part of the human rights system and other human rights laws that bind Australia and which are also relevant to children. What's particularly pleasing about the Convention is that it is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world. Australia ratified the Convention on the 17th of December 1990, and to my knowledge there is only one country which hasn't, the United States, but we won't talk more about that now. So how is the CRC relevant in Australia? The Convention is relevant to all of us, in particular, obviously, to governments. Governments are the primary duty bearer under the Convention. Whether that's state, territory, and federal governments are therefore under an obligation to international law to comply with and support the Convention. Through example, through policy, through legislation, through appropriate institutions, data collection, and awareness raising. Next to governments are obviously organisations. All organisations can be both the means and the end in relation to the realisation of children's rights. This process is important. It's hence why today's seminar has been created. But we must also listen to children and protect them along the way. Civil society organisations in particular, including with many representatives here today, have such an important role to play in this space. And I think one of the key roles we can play is to remind governments of their responsibilities to children under the Convention, but at the same time we must model our good practices in our own work. Thirdly, to individuals. If social institutions, our governments and organisations, are to understand and realise the rights of children, so too must we as individuals. Only through understanding the human rights framework and seeking to adopt it in our own ethical standards, our own behaviour, our own attitudes, and our own values towards children will broaden the systems of change. The Convention is central to our work at UNICEF. UNICEF is the United Nations Children's Fund, and UNICEF has been mandated by the United Nations General Assembly to advocate for the protection of children's rights, to help meet their basic needs, and to expand opportunities to help them reach their potential. It's a wonderful mandate, and it's something we hold very dear to us at UNICEF. We work in 190 countries for the survival, the protection, and the development of every child, with a focus on the lives of the children who are the most disadvantaged and the most excluded. At UNICEF Australia here, we seek to do this through a combination of providing funds to our UNICEF global programs, also directly supporting programs in our region, and through our policy and advocacy work here within domestically in Australia. Regarding the latter, we advocate for the rights of the child to be protected and promoted in the Australians' policies and framework across all of our international and domestic policy, whether that's foreign aid, forced migration, youth justice, and children's rights and business. I wanted to touch briefly on how we integrate child's rights into our programs at UNICEF. For example, last year I had the privilege of visiting our Sports for Development program in Africa. Now, I was fortunate enough to go with the Qantas team to South Africa and to go up to northern Limpopo, to some very rural communities up there. And I think what really hit me was as children in those areas had just unbelievable inequality, particularly young girls and women. They were disproportionately impacted by HIV, sexual abuse, teenage pregnancies, and having to endure an awful lot of both domestic and sexual violence. And school retention rates for girls were so low between the age of 12 and 15, and the data was actually getting worse, not better. UNICEF South Africa, with our support, has been supporting a Department of Education's program for the last 8 years, all around sports for development, as a program to address social issues through physical activity and skills. But by being able to come into villages where traditionally it's been males and boys involved in sport, and to empower young girls with an overarching concept of sport, but in reality being able to talk to these girls as young women, to talk to them and educate them about their rights, when to say no, when to say yes, and when to be themselves as a child and not to be taken advantage of. We have found most extraordinary empowering of these young girls, and I was fascinated when young girls 13 and 14 would come and talk to me and say, we've learnt that we can say no. We've learnt that we will not put up with it. We've learnt that we have got some rights, that we are equal. And I could not help but just feel so fantastic to feel that these young girls were starting to feel greater empowerment in themselves, greater self-confidence, greater self-awareness of themselves. Seeing these programs, happen even in a country which is, relatively modern like South Africa. I now see similar programs, underway in the Pacific, and I realize that there's just so much work to be done in this space to ensure that everyone is aware of their rights as a child, particularly where there is gender inequality. So one of a part of our program is also on youth leadership training for girls, and it does reflect the CRC in the following ways. It seeks survival and development. It encourages young girls to think of themselves and really understand their rights around reproductive health and preventing substance abuse. It ensures that we provide and encourage girls' retention in schools. It also ensures that we provide a lot more inroads into equality and non-discrimination. It is a sad fact that when we travel the world in many societies, we see extraordinary inequality, particularly by disabled and particularly by girls and young women. So it's so important that all of us as organisations try to ensure that we can provide skills training and human rights education for empowerment. The other area is making space for participation. Working in partnership with communities, our programs seek to give girls a platform and a voice. And again, I was just really, really amazed to see young girls developing that voice where perhaps their elder sisters or their parents didn't feel they could. As I mentioned to you, I heard from 2 young girls who just spoke to me at great length about understanding their rights, understanding their freedom, but also understanding in their views their future, how they felt that they had a stronger future, how they were determined to see out their education. They were not going to be forced to leave school at a young age and do manual work, but they wanted to better themselves and go on to ensure that they could redress inequality in the future. And I just am amazed at their inspiration and hope. And all I can think of is organisations involved in human rights, child rights like ourselves, it's our job to try to create that foundation and that platform so that they can have hope, so that they can see a better future. So look, it was, as I mentioned to you, it was certainly inspiring for me, and it's inspiring for me to see the work that happens even in our own country. Here we are today in Sydney, but we don't need to travel far in our own country to see inequality and disadvantage. And I see a few heads nodding. So I think we've all got a lot more work to do there. So how is Australia doing in terms of its commitment to the Convention? As we are delivering on the promises, and sorry, this is where the glasses have to go back on again. Are we delivering on the promises that the Australian government has made to respect, protect and promote the rights of every child? As co-conveners of the Australian Child's Rights Task Force, UNICEF Australia and the National Children's and Youth Law Centre work, and I'm delighted Matt's here and we'll hear from him shortly, and partners, we produce the NGO Alternative Report to the Convention. This process is an important tool to monitor to see how we are as a country tracking against our commitments. And Matthew will shortly talk to us more about this than I. All I do know is that there is a lot of room for improvement. In a report prepared by the Australian Child's Rights Task Force in Australia last year, we confirmed that discrimination and disadvantage is persistent in some children growing up in Australia, and that their lives are not getting any easier. Australia is not the lucky country for many children, and life is particularly tough, whether that is for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, children in the LGBTIQ community, children in rural areas, children with disabilities, children from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds. Children from these groups, for example, are still more likely to experience poverty, discrimination, social inclusion, and disadvantage. Also, the practical protection of the rights of the child, as outlined in the Convention, is limited domestically due to our own legal system. Unless and until it is specifically incorporated into our domestic law, Australian courts have found it largely interpretive only. That Australia does not have a federal Human Rights Act to enshrine human rights protection in our law remains a significant shortcoming in the protection of the rights of both children and adults alike. Protections that should exist for you and I and all of our children. So there are obviously challenges and successes across both our states and territories. We have the Advocate for Children and Young People here in New South Wales, and Andrew, in this office, and I have to say when I came here last time, I was particularly impressed with the strategic plan you and your team have put together. In fact, it sort of really created a bench water. We're about to do our own strategic plan, and it created a bit of a high tide mark for ourselves, and I think it's It's fantastic how you've started to embed that in all of your communications. I couldn't imagine anyone on your team not being aware of your strategic plan at the moment. It's absolutely fantastic. And the more we can see similar plans across similar states, I think the stronger Australia will be. There are new and evolving policy frameworks at a national level that seek to better protect children, such as the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children. The implementation of the National Disability Insurance Scheme is also a remarkable achievement, though I am very cautious of, like all things, the execution of that. But I do think it will better realise the rights of children with a disability and provide them with greater options and choice than perhaps they've had at the moment. These are things which I think the intention is a good step forward, and as I mentioned, it will really come down to the execution. However, there is a lot more work to be done in this space, and that's why I really commend you for taking the time to be here today, to listen from the speakers, but more importantly to join in the discussion later on. So what I would like to do is to just say I'm looking forward to hearing more of those discussions ourselves. I'm also looking forward to hearing where else you think we can make a difference. The difference between talking about the rights in theory and how we can uphold them in practice. It's so important for all of us that young children feel that they have those rights, they know those rights, and we can support them with those rights. So I appreciate there's a lot of practical and theoretical knowledge here in the room, but we're also keen to understand your insights. I would love to hear from the young people present here today and hear your suggestions. And if there's any way that UNICEF can support your work and help you along the way, we'd be delighted to do so. Thank you very much.